Let me introduce our panel. First of all, going right down the line here from my immediate left, we have John Herron, who commanded Bravo Company, 1st to the 7th Cavalry. Tony Nadal commanded Alpha Company. Ernie Savage was a squad leader in his company in the morning. By afternoon, late afternoon, evening, he is the platoon leader. He's the senior surviving leader in his platoon. We have Charlie Company Commander Bob Edwards, and we have from Bud Alley from headquarters, 2-7 Cavalry, George Forrest, 1st to the 7th, or 1st to the 5th Cavalry. So that's our team members, and sorry, Bud, we don't have a photograph there for you. So he's the ghost in the picture, but Bud's there with us. So recognize too, I want to make it clear I was not a member of this band of brothers. As I arrived in Vietnam from my first tour in 1969, most of these guys are going back for their second tour. So these are indeed veterans of that. So our program then is about the development of the air mobile concept, the 1st Cavalry Division, and this goes back to the 1960s when the Army is trying to improve its tactical mobility on the battlefield, and we have the Tactical Mobility Requirements Board being formed, otherwise known as the Howes Board, named for Brigadier General Hamilton Howes. And at Fort Benning, Georgia, now Fort Moore, Georgia, there's a relationship between Fort Moore and these fellows. We'll explain that later. But the 11th Airborne Division will be reactivated, designated the 11th Airborne Division Test, and they will test air mobility concepts, basically dealing with the movement on the tactical battlefield of infantry soldiers supported by artillery and supported by aerial rocket artillery and helicopter gunships. So that whole concept will be developed in the very early 1960s. What happens is the 1st Cavalry Division then will be the headquarters brought from Korea, and elements of the 11th Airborne Test and 2nd Infantry Division, then in training at Fort Benning, elements will be brought together under the 1st Cav flag, and the 1st Cav redesignated as a 1st Cavalry Division Air Mobile on 1st of July, 1965. And so on July 28th, 1965, President Lyndon Johnson announced to the nation, quote, he says, "I have today ordered to Vietnam the Air Mobile Division," unquote. The Air Mobile Division of which the President spoke was this 1st Cavalry Division Air Mobile. In the 3 weeks remaining for training, the 1st Cav came together as a division with 16,000 soldiers and over 400 aircraft. And so the question becomes, how do we get them to Vietnam, to be employed in Vietnam? Well, we're going to do it the same way their fathers did. That is aboard troop ships, and you can see we have aircraft carriers converted into helicopter carriers to carry the troops and equipment across the Pacific in a deployment that takes about 30 days to get to Vietnam, August and September of 1965. Things are going to happen very rapidly here as they move in and land. They're opposite the Central Highlands and move inland. And you can see the troops landing at the beach and then moving in, centered around An Khê, and the division will soon go into operations. On October 1st, 1965, U.S. Commanding General of Vietnam, William Westmoreland, deemed the 1st Cav Division combat ready. Division ordered to take the offensive in Pleiku Province in Vietnam's Central Highlands. On the 13th of November, Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore, commander, 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry, 1st Cavalry Division, received orders from 3rd Brigade Commander Tim Brown to conduct an air assault into the Drang Valley the following morning, conduct search and destroy operations for the next 2 days. An aerial reconnaissance will be conducted, and the way the battle is going to shape out here is that an airstrip at the Plaimie U.S. Special Forces Camp served as the point of embarkation for Moore's 470-man battalion. Several small helicopter landing zones were identified in the Drang Valley. Among them, landing zone X-ray, 13 minutes flying time away from Plaimie, would be the primary assault landing zone. X-ray was located 2 miles from the River Drang at the east base of the Chupong Mountain. LZ Falcon, 9 kilometers distant from X-ray, would serve as the initial field artillery firing position in support of the air assault. 16 Huey utility transport helicopters were provided for the assault. However, there was only enough open area at LZ X-ray for a maximum of 8 helicopters to land at any one time. By necessity, the air assault was conducted in a series of lifts the remainder of the first day of operations, delivering 1 7 Cav soldiers and later water and munitions, while also evacuating the combat wounded. Following a 30-minute artillery preparation fired from LZ's Falcon in Columbus and a bombardment of aerial rocket artillery, the first lift of Bravo Company troops, 1st of the 7th Cav, commanded by Captain John Herron, with Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore's headquarters group, landed at LZ X-ray at 10:48 hours, 14 November, under the cover of escorting helicopter gunships. John Herron, your company was the first company on the ground. What happened?
I took over the company in May of 1964, so I had trained my company for over a year and a half before we went to Vietnam. I had great platoon sergeants, NCOs. I knew them very well. I knew a lot of the men by name. And just before we went, we got 3 brand new lieutenants. And so the platoon sergeants, I told them to educate these lieutenants and show them how to lead their platoons. So we were the first to go into LZ X-ray. I had been on a recon with Colonel Moore the day before, and they had picked out the LZ. And I was a little awed by the terrain we were going into, but I didn't realize how much it was an influence until we got on the ground. We went in, my first job was to secure the LZ, which we did. And about that time, I, of course, realized there was the Chupong Mountain staring us in the face. And I said, oh boy. Well, the next thing that happened, that we captured a prisoner and brought him back, and the prisoner said, you'll see this in the book too, said there are about 3 battalions or more of NVAs up in those mountains, and they want to kill Americans. And that got my attention, that and the Chupong. So Colonel Moore then said, okay, John, take your company and head for that mountain, the foothills of the mountain to the northwest. So I did that, and very soon afterwards, my first platoon ran into a group of NVAs who were the North Vietnamese who were coming down the hill. They didn't know exactly where we were, and so they opened fire on them, and then they got into a pretty good firefight. Meanwhile, my second platoon, the alignment was 2 platoons forward, 1 platoon back, and the mortars were back in the rear with the other mortars. The second platoon, which was supposed to come up on the right, had gone around a clearing and had reconnected with the first platoon. But then Herrick, the lieutenant, who was, I had, as I said, 3 young lieutenants, some of them out of Ranger School and Airborne. This particular lieutenant was very aggressive, probably the most aggressive lieutenant I had. And he calls me and he says, we had just spotted 3 or 4 NVAs in the woods up in the right. And I said, I'm gonna go get them. I said, okay. Not realizing that he was gonna take the whole platoon and run towards those 4 or 5 guys. And so he got up there, and then they hit probably elements of a battalion of NVAs who were coming down from the mountain. And that developed into a hell of a firefight. And Ernie Savage will go into what happened in that second platoon, but it was really tough. The platoon leader was killed, the platoon sergeant was killed. One of the sergeants who covered there, when I told Herrick when he called back, he said, I think I'm surrounded, I don't think I can get out of here. And I said, grab a piece of terrain and defend it, which he did with the help of this sergeant who ran the weapons squad and who was later killed, was overrun by the NVAs. So anyway, Herrick was out there, and Ernie Savage, sitting right here, was probably one of the only NCOs that close to the command. And he was able to get the radio, and he called in, and he said, I'm going to start putting artillery fire around the platoon. And I stayed with him that whole time, and then I sort of became, I had a little action myself that took me out of my contact with the rest of the company, because I encountered an NBA scout. He and I traded shots, and I threw a grenade up that tried over a bank that he had gone down, and unfortunately hit a tree and came back. So then I was worried about what was behind that scout, and so I took my radio operators and we went out trying to go over to where the 3rd platoon would have been, the reserve. And I happened to run into the LZ in one corner of the LZ. I told some machine gunners who were there, watch out for that creek bed. And then I dropped down by a company commander. My radio operator was killed. The captain of a Delta company was shot next to me. So I became a medic, put a tourniquet on him and helped carry him back to the LZ. And then I got back to the LZ, and there was Tony Nadal. And he said, hey, cover me. He was going out to get somebody that had been wounded. And so I provided some cover fire, and then I finally got back to the company in time to see Joe Marm win the Medal of Honor. But anyway, we were able to keep that platoon alive with artillery, thanks to Sergeant Savage. And after the first about hour of that battle, in which I had a number of guys killed and wounded, nothing else. They didn't have any other casualties. And so that was the good part. The bad part was I was really pissed off at Herrick. But now I realize, and I think Colonel Moore realized, that if that platoon, if that platoon hadn't made contact with that NVA battalion, it would have come right in on the LZ, because the other company was coming in, was over on the eastern side, and it was completely open. There wasn't anybody there on my right flank. And they would have overrun that LZ very quickly, and that was why Moore wanted me to go out and make contact.
Thanks, John. Thanks.
That.
We're going to move on. 11:20 hours, the second lift. 11:20 hours, the second lift arrived at LZ X-Ray with the remainder of Bravo Company and Alpha Company Commander Tony Nadal in one of his platoons. So, Tony, what do you remember about what happens?
My name is Tony Nadal, and I was the company commander of A Company, 1/7th Cav. Thanks to a little help from John Herron, when I was assigned to the 1st Cav Division, they were going to make me a signal officer. I told the people, you know, I don't know squat about that. I said, well, that's all right, you know. So John arranged for me to meet Hal Moore, and Hal Moore said, yeah, we'd like to have you stay here. And then I had to go up to the brigade commander, and he liked me, so I ended up in 1/7th Cav. The Division G1, I was president of the brigade commander's office when I called it Division G1. Says, I got this captain here who wants to be here. And the G1 said, where is that son of a bitch? He didn't report in. It's all right, they got over it. Unlike Bob Edwards and John, who had been in command for a year and a half or so, I was freshly arrived. I was made the battalion S2 for about a month aboard ship. I gave classes, and I'd already been there. I commanded a Special Forces detachment for 6 months up in the 1st I Corps zone, right near the Laotian border. So I had experience, and I'd done a lot of research about jungle fighting and whatever, so on board ship I gave classes to not only our battalion, but other units. Got to Nam, and about a month after being there, he made me the company commander of A Company. Now, there's a lesson, and that is that one of my key roles, which they had already subsumed, was establishing myself with my company, particularly with my NCOs. So my actions at LZ X-Ray were determined to a great degree by my need to create a sense of value in my soldiers. They had to learn to trust me. They had to learn that I was competent. And so some of the things I did were a little crazy, but they worked out. As the aircraft came in, they only carried one platoon at a time. And as a company commander, I had to wait at the landing zone for a platoon to land. Then I'd take them to a part of the defensive area in the creek bed, and then I would go back to the landing zone to wait for the next lift of choppers. It took about 30 minutes for the next platoon to come in. So I'd wait for that, then they'd come in, place them. So I did that 3 times, and then I came up to the, back to the front line where my first platoon was, and it so happened that John was in the same area. John looked at me and said, you better get down, you're gonna get killed. And I got down, but then I saw a platoon sergeant of that platoon. I said, where's Lieutenant Taft? And he said, sir, Lieutenant Taft's dead. And I said, he's dead, where? He says, well, he's up in the creek bed. And I had told my guys, we will never lift anyone behind. So again, my inner need to be seen by the soldiers as worthy, I said, I'm going to go get Lieutenant Taft's body. We're not going to leave him out there in that creek bed. So I and my radio operator went out in the creek bed. They were throwing hand grenades at me, but they'd fall short, and the grenades went off with a little black puff of smoke. They were like German potato masher, but just with a little head. They weren't very explosive. We got to the body of the lieutenant, and there was another soldier there, and the other soldier was alive. Now, in my confusion and my desire to do whatever, I grabbed Lieutenant Taft's body, and we brought him back. But I knew then I had to go back. So I went back a second time, and they threw more hand grenades. And I used to tell the joke that it's a good thing the Vietnamese didn't play baseball, because they didn't have good arm, and the grenades all fell short. So anyway, I got back, and that soldier lived. He survived, and we got him to medevac, and I don't know where he's in today, but he's alive, or he was. We then, in the meantime, there was a firefight going on with my other platoons. Then that sort of quieted down, and then at around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Hal Moore called John and I and said, you guys go out together in a joint assault to bring back that platoon, Ernie's platoon. And the first problem was I tried to get artillery support to prep the area we were going, and I couldn't do it. There was only one frequency to communicate, for the forward observers to communicate back to the artillery battery, and John had a very assertive and proficient forward observer, and he had captured that frequency, and when we tried to call, we were told, get off the net, we're firing a mission. Now the artillery, smart artillery would have split the batteries in two, which they can do easily, and shot 2 missions, but they didn't. Anyway, so the time came to move out. But I got my guys together in the creek bed, and I gave them a pep talk. I said, these are out there, your buddies from B Company, the guys you've gone to the bars at Benning with in Columbus, you know them all, whatever. We're going to go out there and get them back and bring them back. And the response of the soldiers was, Gary Owen, gung-ho, let's go, whatever.
Okay, Tony, thanks. We're going to stop you there because we're going to go over into that platoon with Sergeant Savage and
Well,
tell
I'd
us.
like to make one more comment.
Okay,
and
all
that is
right.
that
You got to be quick.
my last action was to tell them, fix bayonets and follow me. And I led the last bayonet assault, as far as I know, committed by the United States Army to try and get Ernie's platoon back. We didn't make it.
I wish to say, if you want to hear more of Tony's stories of tactical combat leadership this afternoon, he'll be talking here in this room on that subject. So, Sergeant Savage, squad leader in the morning, platoon leader in the afternoon and the evening, overnight, the first day of the battle. What happened?
I was in 2nd Platoon, Bravo Company, 1 7th Cal. Captain John Herring was my company commander. Lieutenant Herrick was my platoon leader. And Sergeant First Class Palmer was platoon sergeant. I had trained with these guys probably 15, 16 months. I joined Left Air Cal probably April or May of '64. So I knew everybody in the squad, everybody in the platoon, and practically everybody in the company. And Lieutenant Herrick came to us right before we left Fort Benning, so we didn't know him very well, he didn't know us very well. So it was a learning process from the ship going over, who this guy was, and a little bit of time we had on the ground prior to going to X-ray to get to know our new leader. Now, before we went into X-ray, we were brigade security, and then that morning, we'd been up most of the night. That morning, they flew us into Play Me, which was a special forces account that had been under siege that started the whole battle. They flew us in on Chinook. That's the helicopter with the 2 big blades on top, and for those you're not familiar with that. And they landed us at Play Me Camp, and we went off the back of that helicopter, and I looked and seen what I thought was a big pile of trash, a huge pile. And when we walked past it, I realized it was NVA soldiers that had taken out of the wire and around the Play Me and piled them up, and they were going to do a mass burial with dozers there. So seeing that, .4,000 square feet, 4,000 feet, we could see quite a ways from there. So when we were approaching the LZ, we could see smoke coming off the LZ. And the habit these helicopter pilots had, when they're coming into like an LZ or something, they would drop down to treetop level. Now, in training had been in a lot of times that those skids would hit the top of trees. They were scared the hell out of you. But when they went down to treetop level going into the LZ, I don't think anybody was afraid of hitting the trees, because we realized that there was a lot going on the ground. But anyway, we went in. The LZ had already been prepped with artillery. We went in, helicopters took off, dead silence. Nothing happened. Nobody getting shot or anything. Then the first platoon, like Captain Herring said, was sent off up next to Chupong Mountain. They made contact. My platoon was told to come up on their right flank. We got up and moved towards the right flank. As soon as we got next to him, Lieutenant Herrick turned us and went off to the right. We didn't see. I was a trail squad, so I didn't see what was going on up front. But I knew that we should not be doing what we were doing. Now, if you've seen the movie, you'll probably see it looked like we were disorganized, but we were not. We were a professional platoon, infantry platoon, and we fought that way and we moved that way. So, in the action, we were moving as a tactical platoon. Where the platoon was trapped at. We maneuvered on them initially. My squad went out and we actually fired on their flank. And when we did that, they deployed. And I look and I seen like 2 or 3 platoons up there. You could see pretty well because it wasn't thick canopy underneath the trees. You could see quite a bit. And I could see at least 2 platoons maneuvering to the flank. That's when I started withdrawing, and the 2 machine guns had been set up on the right. They started taking those guys under fire. Our guys started firing, maneuvering backwards. When I got back to where the rest of the platoon was, that's when the NVA hit us real hard from the front and started hitting from the flank. The 2 machine guns stayed there and kept those people at bay until we got organized up there and got somewhat a perimeter put up. But about the time I hit the ground, that's when all hell broke loose, and we lost Lieutenant Herrick, we lost the platoon sergeant, we had a mortar FO with us, he was killed, we had an artillery FO with us, he was hit in the head. Both machine guns got wiped out, including the squad leader. All those guys were killed. And the mortar FO come scrambling around me. He got hit in the head, and when he did, he fell and his handset came off, and I tried to reach over to get it, then there was a log there, and then bark just started flying all over that log because they were shooting at me. So I had to reach under the log and get the handset, and that's when I started calling the artillery and around the platoon.
We're going to have to pause there, Sergeant Savage, and you're going to stay in position there all night, holding off the enemy. What happens in your rescue? How does that take place?
What was the question?
How are they going to recover your platoon? How are they going to get to you? You're going to stay in position overnight,
When did they
and
finally
you're going to
get
call
to
in
you?
artillery support.
He wants to know when you were finally relieved. He wants to know when you were finally relieved on that Monday.
Oh, yeah,
evening.
yeah, I'm sorry. Hearing aids, battery must have went down on them. Yeah, I stayed out there all night. A couple of times they hit us during the night. One time I had a major unit moving down the front then they stopped right where I had a target reference point set. And I called fire for fire on those guys. And I think all the cannons fired from the artillery at that time. So a lot of those people were killed. But they came in, the 1st and 5th came in to the LZ to assist the 1st and 7th. And they came up and relieved us about 11:30 the next morning. When they walked up to us, the artillery stuff has been so close that it threw the dirt and stuff all over us. We were hard to see. And they walked right up on us before they realized where they were at. And until we spoke to them, they didn't know that we were in there.
If you can imagine the prone positions of the soldiers covered with the debris from the artillery rounds that were landing so close that it covered them with dirt and grass and limbs. Difficult for the rescuers to find them, to see them, but they did get you out.
They did.
They reached you, got the platoon out.
And they got us, and it probably took the whole company to move everyone back because we had 8 dead, and everybody else was pretty badly wounded. A couple of them were had minor wounds like myself, but
More than 200 NVA soldiers charged the position held by Charlie Company along an avenue of approach coming down the heights from the Chupong Mountain. Charlie Company was hard hit. Bob Edwards, commander of Charlie Company, what do you remember?
I'm Bob Edwards. I was the junior company commander. My radio call sign was Hotwire 6, and sometime my personality reflects that. Very quickly, we arrived about 13:30. We were the third company in, thanks to A and B Company. The enemy was pissed off. We did not land. We came to a hover 4 or 5 feet off the ground, got on the skids, jumped off. We had trained to do that. Moore grabbed me, he said, forget your regular mission. You take the company and now go block to the south. Took the company, gave them a quick order. We deployed online, had 20 minutes to dig a very shallow foxhole. We were hit by an enemy battalion. They didn't know we were there. We were down in defensive positions. We stopped them cold. A relatively quiet night. Next morning, Moore said, I want the companies to send patrols out. And after you do that, we're going to meet at the C Company command post and we're going to figure out how to get Ernie Savage back. I sent those patrols out. Very quickly, the whole front erupted in fire. I called, by this time I had a 4th platoon attached from B Company, 2nd and 7th. My right 2 platoons answered. They had gotten back without problem. My 1st and 2nd platoon on my left flank, no answer. Because they were, this is maybe 50 guys defending against at least 2 companies of NVA attacking us again. Over the next 2.5 hours, Moore says there was savage, sometimes hand-to-hand fighting. There were numerous acts of individual courage and unit discipline, soldiers fighting for the men on their left and right. We held the line, but it was at a cost. We started with 5 officers, 106 men. By 10:30 that morning, the NVA were withdrawing. There were no unwounded officers. 42 officers, or 42 men killed. 20 wounded, left with a strength of about 49 men commanded by the 1st sergeant. They pulled us off the line. Another company replaced us. They threw me on a medevac plane. And that was the end of my Vietnam story. But what I want to tell you, as you know, we have stories and we like to tell them. During breaks in the evening, if you see us standing there, do not hesitate to come up and introduce yourselves and ask your question or whatever you want to say, because we love to talk to youngsters like you.
Thank you, Bob. At midday of the 2nd day, 2nd Battalion, 5th Cavalry, arrived at X-Ray, having marched from landing zone Victor 3.5 kilometers away. By nightfall of the 2nd day, LZ X-Ray held 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry, 2nd Battalion, 5th Cavalry, and 1 rifle company of 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry. At mid-morning of 16 November, 3rd day of the battle, 1 7 Cav was ordered to withdraw from the fight, leaving 2 7 Cav and 2 5 Cav in defensive positions and LZ X-Ray for the night. At echelons of command above the soldiers in LZ X-Ray, it was decided to carpet bomb the enemy-occupied areas adjacent to the landing zone. Normally, B-52 bombers are employed in a strategic or perhaps operational role. In this case, they were used in a tactical role in close air support of ground troops. This required that friendly troops be in a safe area at least 3 kilometers away from the target objectives. Consequently, 0900 hour, 17 November, 25 Cav was ordered to leave LZ X-ray and march 4 kilometers, roughly 2 miles, northeast to LZ Columbus. At the same time, 27 Cav was ordered to leave LZ X-ray, move on foot 4 kilometers northeast to LZ Albany. Attached to 27 Cav, and at the end of the battalion marching column was George Forrest Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Cavalry. George Forrest, you're on the march. What happened?
Bob Evans is always a tough act to follow, but I'll do my best. Unlike my comrades here, these guys were the 7th Cav, I was the 1st of the 5th. Being attached, if you ever you're attached, you're the redheaded stepchild in a blonde family. In order to get out of when I joined the air cav, we never walked anywhere. We always had helicopters coming. So that morning when the commander told me that I was going to have to walk to the next pickup zone, I was shocked. So in the column of march, fortunately for me, I was at the rear of the column. The commander of the 2nd of the 7th called all the commanders forward along the column. He called us forward, I believe, to position us in the perimeter on Albany. I was separated from my unit, went up to the front of the column. At that time, an ambush was sprung. The safest place for me on that battlefield that day was to get back to my unit. So with my 2 radio operators in tow, I attempted to work my way back to my company. My 2 radio operators were killed on that, my attempt. I made it back, we circled up, spent the night there, and I'm here because of that. So I would yield the rest of my time to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Short and sweet. You done good.
We're going to follow that right up with Bud Alley, because he is there at the same time in the same fight there at LZ Albany.
Well, first of all, let me just say what an honor it is to be up here with these gentlemen. These are true leaders that you're listening to up here. They were the best that there was in 1965 on the battlefield as company commanders. Truly men to follow. As a young 2nd lieutenant who had gone into the Army with no further training in his ROTC commission, I never went to OIBC. I got selected to be a battalion communication officer after about 6 months. So I was trained in some communications, and that's all. I got assigned back to Fort Benning, Georgia in July 1965 as they were forming up the 1st Cav. And while they were doing that, I realized right quick this unit that I'd been thrown into was not this 1st Battalion 7th Cavalry. It was a 2nd Battalion 7th Cavalry, and we were a bastardized unit. They were grabbing bodies from everywhere they could do in the Army and putting us together. We never trained together, we never knew each other, and then they put us on a boat and shipped us overseas. But while I was there at Fort Benning, I had a little time, and there was one guy going around teaching some classes. And I happened to have the pleasure of getting to go hear this man. He was a really strack-looking guy. He was sharp as a tack. He had his Special Forces patch on, and he was teaching a course on escape and evasion. His name was Tony Nadal, sitting up here, and he was teaching that course. And I give all my credit to Tony Nadal. As we left the battlefield of X-ray on the morning of the 16th, we took off in a column of 2s. 10 days prior to going on the battlefield, we had a complete turnover in personnel at the top. We had a new CO, new XO, new S2, new S3, new S4, and we were missing 6 second lieutenant platoon leaders at the time we were entered into the battlefield. So we were a very disorganized operation. We got on the battlefield. I got there on the 16th as the battle was winding down at X-ray. Didn't sleep that night, hadn't slept the night before either. So here we are on the morning of the 17th when they order us off the battlefield. We're just about out of water. No, we'll get you water after you get to your spot on the map, which is about 3 clicks away. So how are we going to go? Well, we're going to go into column of 2. What about all these headquarters people that got tossed out there at the last minute? We had truck drivers, we had chaplain's assistant, we had all the clerical people from the headquarters operations center. Well, grab all the stuff that's on the battlefield left over. You guys be the mules, and just follow Charlie Company on the march, and we're going to column of 2s. And Allie, you're a second lieutenant. John Howard was a second lieutenant medical support officer, and he and I were on the eastern side of the column, separated by about 50 to 100 meters on the western side. The western side was where the captains were. John and I were up the front of the column. The captains were back to back. We literally walked into the middle of the 1st of the 33rd NVA, heavily refreshed and heavily armed North Vietnamese. They were in the trees, they were in the ground, and when the shooting started, it just got ugly real quick. And it started about 1:30 in the afternoon, and all that afternoon it was grass. You stand up, you get shot. You lay down, you can't see who to shoot. So it was a battle all day. Finally, we're moving around trying to figure out where we're supposed to go. No compass, no map, no nothing. Headquarters is up there about 800 meters above me. We're cut off from behind between me and Captain Forrest Company. They've come in behind us. They've got us, and we get hit by the 8th of the 66 from the western side. So we're literally totally right there in the middle of the killing zone the whole day. And as I found the lieutenant, he would be dead. I'm looking around trying to find somebody to lead me because, hey, I'm not a leader. I'm just a water boy. I'm not trained in this stuff. Battle goes on. I keep finding somebody. I finally find one lieutenant named Butch All. Butch, let's figure out where we're supposed to go. Butch says we go this way. He was a Charlie Company guy. Okay, Butch, you lead off, and we got about 3 guys able to move, and we're going to go. Butch stands up to lead off and gets killed with a machine gun. So there's no leaders anywhere, and I'm crawling around in there. By now, it's almost dark. We can hear the enemy walking around, and they're executing our wounded because they have no ability whatsoever to take care of an American wounded guy. I call up on one guy who I happened to know. He's wounded badly. I try to move him. I'm trying to find John Howard with some medical aid. The guy dies in my arms. Now I'm getting the panic stage. No water, no sleep for 3 days. Been in this action for all day. I'm crawling around. I fall into a little ditch. There's 5 wounded American guys there. I don't know who they are. They're crying, they're bleeding, they're shot up, they're wounded badly. I had no idea I had even been hit. They look at me, and I look at them, and I'm like, last thing I want this morning is you guys. And all of a sudden they say, Lieutenant, you got to take care of us. You got to get us out of here. Dark is coming in. I hear the artillery firing from 2 miles away at landing zone, Columbus. I say, okay, guys, if you can move and stay with me, we'll try to figure out and get on the sound of the guns. We'll try to get back there. So that night, we did an E&E up through the NVA. I got them all back into the perimeter at at the landing zone the next morning. Didn't know who they were. We all got on a plane. They got evacuated. I never saw them again. And finally, after 57 years, all 5 of them had found me and told me thank you. That's my story.
Thank you, Bud.